Hi, Instagram Live. Here we go. This is the first time we've ever done this. It's Margaret Hoover. Great to be here. And we're doing firing line from home because here we are and we're all quarantined. We're doing the thing that's most socially responsible for us to do. And what I thought would be most helpful is to talk to somebody who can tell us what social distancing is. And so I'm about to invite Ing Pottinger, a virologist from the CDC, to join me to go through what it means to be social distancing and how to do it properly. No better person than this woman who I'm about to invite to join me. So here we go. Hey, there she is.
This is my first live Instagram live feed.
You know what? It's my first Instagram live too. And you know what? It's the country's first pandemic. So there's a lot of firsts going on. But I'm really actually grateful that I happen to know you in a personal capacity, because what I found myself doing over the last couple of days is essentially being addicted to texting you for answers about what we're seeing on television, what we're hearing. And so I want the people who are watching to know how qualified of a person you are, that I luckily have in my own personal orbit. So in the spirit of Firing Line, Ing Pottinger, welcome to Firing Line. You are a virologist, a PhD virologist. You are trained at McGill University and also at the University of California, UC Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yep.
You're a virologist. The majority of your work has actually been at the CDC in the PEPFAR program overseeing AIDS and the spread of AIDS and the HIV epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
You spent a large part of your career actually working directly for Dr. Debbie Birx,
Mm-hmm.
who has become this woman that we see now on these, as you look at the briefings from the president and the vice president, there she is in the background. She's the one who comes and speaks so calmly and sanely.
Thank goodness.
And you know her very well and have worked for her directly. Currently, you are a senior technical advisor for the Laboratory of Surveillance at Columbia University. Tell me what that means.
So we have a project through ICAP Columbia. ICAP is a group within Columbia University that is an implementing partner of CDC and PEPFAR. So CDC gets money from PEPFAR, the US government, to implement programs, but CDC obviously isn't large enough to go out and do clinics and provide drugs and laboratory services in all over the world, but primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. So they employ implementing partners such as Columbia to go out and do the hands-on work. So all of our projects are PEPFAR funded, and so I still work for CDC and for PEPFAR.
Okay, so a trained virologist is somebody who studies viruses.
Mm-hmm.
You know all about viruses from how their makeup, their DNA, their RNA, but you also know how they spread.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hoping that you can give us some information about how the coronavirus, or COVID-19, is spreading. We have been hearing on the news, everybody is saying, practice social distancing.
Right.
But this is a new term, and we frankly don't all know what it means. What does social distancing mean? Can we just break that down first? The guidelines that have come out have said no more than groups of 10.
Yeah.
Is that enough? Is groups of 10 enough? Give me some basic parameters for what social distancing means.
So social distancing means basically stay away from people who aren't in your immediate family, don't live with you. Right? Don't go out and go grocery shopping. Like this notion that we're supposed to be social distancing.
Don't go grocery shopping?
Like people are standing in lines at Costco with hundreds of people because they're going to run out of toilet paper. That's not social distancing, right? Like you're literally all crowded in a line waiting to pay together, hundreds of people. Go to your local store where there are less people, right? Practice at least the 6 foot distance. And the reason why people say 6 feet is because when you sneeze, you aerosolize virus. If you're infected, you can aerosolize virus. And 6 feet is really the far end of how far particles can go.
So
mm-hmm.
Can you go to your grocery store?
Yeah, you should go out and buy food. Just go in there. If you see a really packed store, probably not a good time to go in, especially, and I would say that you need to take account of your own situation. I live in a multi-generation household. Both of my parents are over 70. They have underlying conditions. And if they got sick, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So we are really, really cautious here. We only have one person who leaves the house to go to work every day. And unfortunately, he can't not do that. So we...
He works at the White House, by the way.
Works at the White House. And they are probably not doing the best social distancing there, but he has moved his office and he's only in a huge office now with 2 people. So he's doing his best at work so that he doesn't come home and, you know, put us at risk. My parents don't leave the house, and I just touched my face like I'm trying to tell you not to.
So we're all having to learn these new habits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go through the social distancing, but I want to actually talk to you. And again, we're talking to Dr. Ing Pottinger, who is a trained virologist who worked at the CDC for 10 years under the direction of Dr. Debbie Birx, who is now the coordinator for the entire government's and White House's interagency response to the coronavirus. And Ing Pottinger, thank you for being with us. I just want to introduce you to new people who have come online so that they know who you're talking about. Is it safe to order delivery food?
Yeah, I think it's very safe. You know, I'm sure someone's going to ask us about how long can the virus survive on surfaces. And I just read through the entire scientific report, and they study plastic, stainless steel, copper, and cardboard boxes. And of course, we get Amazon deliveries every day with cardboard boxes. And it does look like the virus can survive on cardboard boxes for up to 24 hours. Plastic, 2 to 3 days, same with stainless steel. So it's important to wipe down things. If you get, you know, stuff delivered to your house, it's not a bad idea to just wipe things down. If you have alcohol spray, so this is what we do in the lab. We spray everything down with 70% alcohol as a way to disinfect everything. When we come in,
get 70% alcohol. Is that a Lysol spray, or is that like
hard right now?
Alcohol in a thing?
Yeah, so you can buy 100% alcohol and dilute it down to 70%. Or you can buy 70% alcohol and put it in a spray bottle, and, you know, isopropyl alcohol or ethanol, or it's called ethyl alcohol. It's hard to find, but not impossible. I mean, I just bought 4 gallons today.
You bought 4 gallons?
Mm-hmm. Because I'm a laboratory, and so I'm going to spray everything down.
Okay.
I'm not telling the average person to do this. Do have a little on stock, put it in a bottle, and spray your boxes when you receive them. It's not going to harm you. It'll evaporate.
Okay. So put it in just your own little spray bottle and spray down boxes. Okay.
Yeah. Make sure it's at least 60% alcohol. Okay. That's the minimum. And in the laboratory, we use 70%.
And where can I get that if I'm not going to the store and buying things? And if you're not going to
buy it online, and it will ship to you.
You buy it on Amazon, buy it online?
Yeah. eBay, Amazon, okay. You can find it.
Okay. Let's talk about, I have a couple more sort of how do we implement social distancing questions in our own lives. Mm-hmm. And then I have a different direction that I want to go in with you. A lot of people are at home with their kids. They're working parents, and they're trying to figure out, what do I do with my kids during this time? Can our kids go to the park?
So I would say for the time being, I would not take the children to the park where there are swings and slides, where they're all sharing surfaces and rubbing hands and their noses and their faces and touching these surfaces. And I know some doctors will say, just go home and wash your hands, except that while they're at the park and a virus is living on there for 2 to 3 days, you know, they're touching their faces, they're touching their mouths, and they're picking their noses. And all of these things are potential ways of getting infected. And children, by the way, are not going to have, if they're infected, their disease won't be severe, but it's about the spread, right? Of then giving it to the parents. And then if, in my case, I would give it to my parents in my house. So just know your risk. Our risk is high because of our older folks in the house. We don't take the children to the park. I mean, they can go outside in the backyard and play by themselves without other children. You can go for a walk in the woods with them. You know, it's totally fine.
Okay. So then here's a question that, you know, everybody's talking about flattening the curve and what flattening the curve is, right? The reason we're social distancing is because we want to try to help flatten the curve. Please explain what that means.
So if we do nothing, we get this giant peak, right? Everyone's seen the giant peak. And this is what happens when there are no interventions. The virus right now is super infectious. You know, they're estimating the R naught that value, I think people are getting more and more familiar with. Of that's basically how many people would I infect on average if I got infected. And so right now that number is somewhere between 2 and 3. So that means if I got infected on average, I would infect 2 to 3 other people. So that, which is much higher than like seasonal flu, not as high as MERS, right? But it's super infectious, and so we were trying to stay away from places and people as much as possible because of how infectious. So in this scenario, we have this peak where everyone would get infected quickly. In no intervention. Now,
so if it gets infected quickly, there's a massive influx and strain that's put on our hospital system, our ICU beds, our intensive cares, and that our system simply won't be able to stomach it. So in order to keep it from being a peak, but to be sort of a flat incline.
Right. So now we want, instead of this giant peak and where, you know, every old person finds himself infected and at the hospital needing care that we can't give them, we want to spread out the infection over time, right? So that our systems can accommodate all the ICUs and all the people who will get sick over time and not all at once.
So are the guidelines that the government put out
3
days ago saying don't get in groups larger than, what do they say, 10 people? Is that the kind of behavior that if everybody implemented today would actually flatten the curve?
Dramatically.
Really?
Dramatically.
So like what
everybody
you're saying is,
literally stayed home for 2 weeks and minimized their outings and interactions with people outside of their house, we would make a major impact in bending that curve.
Okay. And then how long would that go on? So say we do that for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we see some success in terms of the rate of the speed of the
new infection
increasing of that, or not the increasing of the spread of the virus. How much longer would that need to continue?
So I would say 2 weeks is probably the low end of that number. Because if we start right now, people are still going to be infected in about a week because the incubation time is about 5 to 6 days. It's like if we all locked down, hunkered down for a month solid, we would really get somewhere. Like we wouldn't put this to bed because there's always leakages in the system, right? People are going to have to get groceries. There's still systems that need to go. So people are leaving their house to do basic functions. Right?
Basic, like no voluntary travel, for example.
Right. It would have a huge impact.
What else?
It would have a huge impact on the curve if every single person followed these guidelines. Yeah.
Just stayed home. So it's sort of getting to the point where it's socially irresponsible to not follow these guidelines. All right. So this has kind of been like a slow wave, the way it has approached our consciousness in this country. And I will tell you that I just got an email this morning. I got an email this morning that on March 9th, I was in a small group of people, 15 people. So this is before the guidelines came out, before we knew we shouldn't be with 10 or less. And it said that one of the people that I was with had tested positive for COVID-19 and was home and recovering, but that I should know that I was in a small group with somebody who was positive and had this 8 days ago. Yeah. Now, I've had no symptoms. I don't know that I've been exposed. I don't know if it's still incubating or if maybe I dodged a bullet. What does this is going to start happening to a lot of people. Many people are going to become exposed or know that they came into contact with somebody who affirmatively tested positive on a COVID-19 test. What am I supposed to do now?
So you need to stay home, limit your exposure.
Good. Here we are.
Here we are. Limit your exposure, spend time with your children, and stay there. And, you know, because it was 9 days ago?
9 days ago.
You know, you're on the far end of, if you have been infected, you'd probably be showing signs. But there are plenty of asymptomatic people who are shedding virus.
Yeah. You said that you have said to me privately when we've discussed this, everybody says there's a 2-week incubation period. But what you told me is that it's actually more people have a 4 to 6 day incubation period, and that the longest incubation period is 23 days. The reason we say 14 days in public on the news is because that's the median, not the average.
No. So the on average, it's about 5.1 days. That's out of the China data. that's the incubation from being exposed to shedding virus and showing signs. Now, that's the average. Every biological response is an average, right? So some people are going to be 1 to 2 days, and some people, like the Chinese have found, are upwards actually of 23 days. But that was like one case out of their thousands. So it's, you probably learned this in school, that an average is a bell curve or some shape of it. And so by 14 days, it covers about 95% of the population who will have, if they got infected, will start showing signs.
So it's possible that I was with somebody who had it and I didn't get it, even though I know I hugged her.
Yeah.
I hugged her and I might have not gotten it.
Of course.
Okay.
Didn't,
I didn't share any droplets. There were no droplets shared.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what should I do? Should I notify, if I work in a office or company, presumably everybody's working from home now anyway, do I have a responsibility in this case to notify my employer?
Yeah, I think it's a responsible thing to do, to tell people. We're going to get to the point where everyone's been exposed, frankly, right? And
so then what is the responsibility of the exposed person to the people in their life, their employers, their neighbors, the people they've come in?
I think people should definitely let other people know. That's what I've noticed through this, is that people do make the right decisions. I think as long as we don't stigmatize people who are actually infected, then no one's going to have an issue saying I've been infected. I mean, it's like the flu. We don't really stigmatize flu infections, right? So we shouldn't be stigmatizing this. If you have it, do socially responsible things and tell people that there's a chance I was exposed, or I was exposed. I don't think I'm infected. I've been home for 9 days. I don't have any signs or symptoms, but I'm letting you know, so that you can decide what you want to do with that information. But it's better to let people make that decision and determine their own risk.
Okay. Getting questions from viewers. Shouldn't public transportation be entirely closed?
I think it's going to come to that soon. I think municipalities will be making these decisions, but yeah. But the problem is, the core reason why they haven't been closed is a lot of people who work on the front lines, your doctors, your nurses, stuff, need public transportation to get to work. Right. So we should keep them open for that purpose, and not for, to go uptown to see friends and stuff.
So was it possible that you could conceivably see public transportation closed, but for emergency workers, responders, doctors?
I hope that's the only reason that would be the reason to keep them open, is to make sure our doctors and our first responders can get to work.
How, a lot of the models now suggest that the critical period from now is really to be 45 days from now, right? That there are these, is that right?
I mean, I looked at the models. I mean, models come with their own limitations, right? It's all about what goes into the model and dictates what comes out of the model. And what I mean by that are your assumptions. They make all of these assumptions, like, it says the R naught is 2.1, but if you change that to 2.8, all of a sudden it's like many more days. You see what I'm saying? So it's all about what data we have now and the assumptions we put into the models in terms of incubation days. So the model that you're referring to put in an incubation day of 5.1, because that's the average, right? So it's only as good as the data we put into them. And this is true with all modeling for all diseases.
And based on the models you've seen, when do these peaks, if the flattening the curve doesn't happen, when are these peaks going to reach this critical point?
If we do nothing, the peak is about 3 months, is what the models say. If we do nothing, 3 months. And
so that means in June, we have a complete crisis in our ICUs across the country.
Yeah, and 80% of the population's infected. That's if we do
80% of the population.
That's what the models predict. Yeah.
Okay, so how do we know if we're going to make progress? If everybody stays home now for the next 2 weeks,
it's like,
how are we going to know that it's successful?
You're not going to know until later. You're not going to know until much later, because they're data points, right? And every data point is going to be going up. And we don't know what the do nothing really looks like, because we don't exactly know what the R naught is. And the incubation period is an average, right? Like I said, everything's an average. That means there are people who are going to take longer or shorter that affect this curve. And we won't know until it's all over and we go back and we look at the data of what it was versus what it could have been and compare it against the models.
Okay. Mayor de Blasio, who's the mayor of New York, is saying that a shelter in place for New York City is a possibility. How should people prepare for
that? Well, I subscribed to Disney Plus yesterday. Netflix, get some food, don't buy all the toilet paper. We're not going to die of a toilet paper shortage.
Viewer question, are there any special recommendations for pregnant women?
Right now, there's no data to suggest that pregnant women are a higher risk group, in terms of their health or their child's health. It's very limited. I mean, just a handful of cases here and there, but the 9 cases out of China showed there were no issues with, the mom being pregnant and the child came out perfectly healthy. So it's not quite like the flu in that way. And thank God that this virus doesn't affect the younger age groups and pregnant women like the flu does.
What about, now you're a virologist, and this is Ing Pottinger that we're talking to, who's a virologist who was with the CDC for more than 10 years and worked directly for Dr. Debbie Birx, who is the blonde woman who stands out and speaks sense and truth to power behind President Trump and Vice President Pence on these briefings that we're seeing day to day now. Thank God we're seeing them daily, because I feel like the main thing we've been missing is information from leadership to tell us what we need to do in order to prepare and what social distancing means and how to behave responsibly as adults in the context of the pandemic, which is something none of us have ever survived before. Can you tell me about the vaccine?
Yes. So the vaccine, so this is a record, right? We're like 26 record. This is a record number of days from the research bench to phase 1, right? Which began yesterday. They injected the first
63 days or 65 days.
Yeah, that's what it's unheard of. And the reason that this company, the NIH with Moderna, I believe the company's name is, managed to get here so quickly is because they worked on a MERS vaccine. So they had the technological platform already to do this work, and they were working with a virus, of course, is related to this coronavirus.
Also a coronavirus. MERS was also a coronavirus, very different variation.
Yes, MERS is related, same family, but not as closely related. This virus is more closely related to the SARS virus.
Okay. So
the
vaccine. So they've started testing it. So then now what happens? They start testing it. You see these healthy women getting these vaccines. Now what's the process? How long will this could actually be something that the people are benefiting from?
Well, this is going to take a couple months. The phase 1, they're going to do another injection a month from the first injection, and it's 45 people getting different doses of the vaccine, and it's just a safety test and different dosing to see what kind of immune response is elicited. And then they'll review that data, and then it'll go into phase 2 and then to phase 3 before FDA will look at the data and review it and approve it. Most vaccines don't get approved, right? Like there are plenty of vaccines that go into phase 1, phase 2 trials that don't make it. So
it's possible that this one could just be a miss and not get approved? Like why wouldn't it get approved?
Because it doesn't work. It doesn't provide protection. So you don't know that until you get to phase 3.
What happens in phase 2 and what happens in phase 3?
So in phase 2, they start to scale up the number of participants, and they honed in on their dosage. And so it's more getting the dose right and seeing if you're getting some kind of response and making sure that people aren't becoming more infected, like more likely to be infected. That has happened in some vaccine trials, including some HIV trials, where the vaccine actually made you more likely to get infected, which of course is not what we want. So there are different outcomes of vaccines, and phase 2 will give us a lot of information on that. And then phase 3 moves into people who are more likely to get it, to see if there's protection. And it's a blinded, right? It's blinded. Some people will get
They're not just giving it to healthy people, they're giving it to everybody, including people who are vulnerable.
And then the comparison, the blind comparison of people with and without.
Can you tell me if somebody has it, is exposed to it, has it, maybe they're asymptomatic, but they find out later. There are tests, as I understand, where you can figure out if you actually had it. If you were asymptomatic, you might not have known. So I'll be able to get a test. Say I did get it from this person on March 9th. You know, I go through my 14-day, 23-day self-quarantine period. I had no symptoms. I'll be able to get a test later to find out whether I had it.
So they're working. So the test that's being used now for diagnosing you is to understand whether or not you're infected right now and you have replicating virus. It detects the genetic material of the virus. And if your virus is replicating, you will have a lot of virus and a lot of RNA to be detected. Now, when you get infected, your body develops antibodies. That happens over time, over a couple week period, and different types of antibodies are made in response to your infection. What we need and what we don't actually have is an antibody test, a serology test. And that's in the works. Many people are working on it. I was just having a conversation this morning about it with my old CDC colleague about, you know, the development of the serology test so that after all of this is done, we can go back and figure out how many people were actually infected.
How many people had it?
Yeah.
No, can you get coronavirus? Can you get COVID-19 twice?
So the general thinking right now
that's a viewer question, just so you know. And that viewer was Jeannie Hoover. Thanks, Mom.
Is that no, there's no evidence to suggest that you can get it twice. What we will see, there's, you know, we're at the preliminary stages of this. I think that people are making this guess based on SARS. You couldn't get SARS twice. So we'll see whether or not reinfection occurs. It's all going to depend on really the genetic variation and the mutations over time. Like flu varies, you know.
So we just we don't know. You're saying
we don't
know. Okay, your old boss, Dr. Debbie Birx,
mm-hmm.
who was at the CDC, who is now running the interagency response with the vice president, the president, who's on all these press conferences. I'm a little bit obsessed with her. Here's what she said in the press conference yesterday. She said the core group that will stop the virus are the millennials because they intuitively know how to communicate without meeting in person. And I think there was also this sense that she was sort of flattering the millennial generation as she said this, because as we all know, millennials need to be flattered and they need to feel a sense of responsibility and purpose in the world. And that their purpose could be, to
save the rest of us.
Couch and texting their friends or WhatsApping their friends. But, how do you think that that's true? Do you think it's going to be the millennials who slow this spread?
So I think it was a very clever way to address millennials. And I think the real point to this is that every single human in our country has a role to play in this. We all have a role to play here. It's not going to be the old people who need to stay home because they're going to get sick and die. You know what I mean? It is every single person has a role to play for themselves and, more importantly, their community. And millennials are very good at, she's right, at communicating and messaging to each other. And if it, I hope that they get the message that they have a role to play in this, and that our best hope is that everyone understands that staying home is good for us and good for our community.
We have another question from some healthcare workers. Our healthcare workers, it seems to me, are going to be repeatedly exposed to the virus. Are there recommendations for what to do for people who have repeated exposure?
Yeah. So there's two pieces to this. So you hear about younger doctors, people on the front line who, like the Chinese doctor who's passed away. He was, I believe, 34, right? What we don't know is dosing. And I mean exposure dose. So how much virus plays in your disease outcome. So was it because he was exposed every day over and over and over again that his disease progression was so, negative?
Unstoppable.
Yeah. That it overwhelmed him versus someone who might get one droplet from, being at the grocery store, which is very different. So there are things that people can do in their house. Like in my house, we have an isolation plan, in case one of us does get sick, of what do we do in our house if someone gets sick. And in our case, we have an upstairs suite where our my husband and I have our bedroom, and the kids don't sleep up there. No one else sleeps up there. So if someone gets sick, we're going to ship this person upstairs, close the door for a couple of weeks and give them food and say, I'll see you soon. Like you really do have to plan what happens if someone in your family gets sick. When my husband comes home every day, he obviously walks in the door, washes his hands. He's been around people all day. So he goes and he showers instantly before he touches the kids.
He takes his clothes off.
Everything. Takes his clothes off, jumps in the shower, scrubs himself down, and comes out and talks to us. And so that's how we are dealing with any possible exposure in our house.
One more question, and then I just want folks to know this will be available on Instagram TV later. Tell me about the tests. The testing. You worked at CDC. You worked in the lab where the now infamous contamination happened at the CDC tests.
We don't know that that's actually what happened, but
you don't know that that's actually what happened?
No. So the contamination notion came from an FDA visit that said like it's possible there was a contamination. CDC has not actually given the answer as to why their test was initially not working. And they say it's a manufacturing thing, but the details of that, that laboratorians like myself care about, like what was it about the manufacturing, has not been disclosed, and hopefully will be disclosed through, either an HHS investigation or some sort. But we need to know, because some poor decisions were made. And I'm telling you, as a CDC person who loved the agency, I loved our mission, I loved what we meant to do there. But I think that there was definitely some missteps in the very beginning. And these questions are all coming out now. I've been saying them for weeks and weeks on end to my husband about the testing failures and decisions and the QC process. Why were these kits released in the first place?
So when will there be tests that are widespread so that anybody who really does have symptoms, who's coughing at home and has a fever, isn't told just to stay home, but has a way to get to testing in order to know whether they have the coronavirus or not?
So the testing is definitely increasing, right? Like they said today that 8,200 tests were done in the last 24 hours. That's an exponential growth from the day before and the day before that. It's happening. It's starting to get out.
In 2 weeks, it'll be prevalent.
My corner clinic has announced that if you think of COVID, literally 20 feet from my house, says that they can do testing now. So like that is a major improvement from my friend who's
in Washington, D.C. in the middle of
Washington. My friend lived in, my friend was in New York City a week ago, tried to get testing. She went to 3 different clinics and was completely unable to. But I think that we're seeing a shift now that the private companies, the private labs have finally picked up and to do the testing. And to be fair, the public labs were never meant to test the millions of people in our country. That's not it was never their role, but we just didn't have the right leadership and understanding at the top level of how these things work to get there. But now we do.
You mean the leadership from the White House, or leadership?
Yeah, the task force didn't have the right.
There was no task force?
No, the task force didn't include, for a while, it didn't include the FDA, right, which was strange. And FDA played a major role in the delay in testing. Like I would say 60% CDC, but 40% of it was definitely owned by FDA approval process, i.e. the emergency use authorization.
Okay.
So.
Dr. Ing Pottinger, thank you. Wait, one more question from a viewer. Can a fly bring coronavirus into your house?
Hey, this is from my crazy friend, and no, it cannot.
Thank you, crazy Ing Pottinger friend. Ing Pottinger, Dr. Ing Pottinger of the CDC and now of Columbia University Laboratories. Thank you very much for answering questions and just trying to shed light on this and help us all understand how we can be a part of helping the country fight back against the pandemic and prepare so that we don't face a cataclysmic crisis whereby rationing and the dire circumstances that we're seeing in Italy and around the world come upon us, because it is really just around the corner, but it's within all of our power individually to make decisions that are responsible so that we don't see that kind of a crisis as a country. Thank you very much, Heng.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.